Welcome to the Honest Reflection Podcast with your hosts, Cody Hairston and Nick Woods. Here, we want to help you reflect on your week and be honest about your relationship with God. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Man, it's going great. Having a good week and looking forward to chatting with you again. Just it's actually spring break this week, so we got kids at home. Got some fun times, a little bit warmer weather, so it's all good. How about you? How are things going for you guys?
We're making a little bit of a comeback. Changed up some medications. Had to call in the big gun. Also had a little bit of rain that I think is helping the situation. But as usual, God is good, and I'm also looking forward to continuing our discussion on parables. I think we mentioned last week we're going to be talking about parables for the next couple of months, but for this month in particular, we're going to be focusing on parables about the kingdom. So last week's was also kind of related to the kingdom, and there's actually a lot of parables that give insights into what the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, is going to be all about. That was one of the biggest misunderstandings of people when Jesus came. There were people who thought it was going to be a physical kingdom. The Jesus was going to take out the Romans and the Jewish people would be back on top, things like that. So a lot of misunderstandings, and really, I feel like those misunderstandings caused them to miss Jesus, to miss the Messiah. But it's still a misunderstanding today, maybe on some slightly different fronts. But people still don't fully understand what the kingdom of heaven is about, what the church is all about. But I think we can get a better understanding of the kingdom as we just come to understand these parables. So I'm really looking forward to looking at these parables with you. Today's is going to be the next one, actually, in Matthew chapter 13. And so I'll go ahead and read verses 24 through 30. It says, Jesus presented another parable to them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went away. But when the wheat sprouted and bore grain, then the tares became evident as well. The slaves of the landowner came and said to him, 'Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares?' And he said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' The slave said to him, 'Do you want us then to go up and gather them up?' But he said, 'No, for while you are gathering up the tares, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow both to grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather up the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them up, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" And so there's a lot going on there. I always feel like parables are good, but this one in particular has been speaking to me as we've been talking about it a little bit beforehand. But Nick, can you go ahead and walk us through what I just read for us?
Yeah, I think the first couple that we've used, like some of the parables are really short, like just one basic point. And I think most of the parables, we talked about this last time, they have kind of like one takeaway, and so we'll talk about that a little bit more. And I'm like you, the more we kind of read over this and kind of prep for it, it's like really fascinating and really some deep principles here that I think we find. But I think just to kind of like lay out what we've read, it's the kingdom of heaven, but the kingdom of heaven is compared to, or like a man who is sowing seed in the field. So you have like from the very start, again, you have this planting analogy, this farmer who's going out and he's planting seed. This time it's wheat. He's sowing wheat, and he sows wheat. And in the middle of the night, the enemy comes, everybody's asleep, and he throws out tares, the New American Standard says, weeds, the Christian Standard says. It appears that what he sows, according to the parable, is a type of weed that looks a lot like a wheat plant. So maybe darnel, or there's some kind of connection to like what this is that is being sowed, so that when the servants see it, he said, "You didn't get good seed." And the master said, "No, the enemy has come and he has messed up our field with all this bad stuff." All right. And so they say, "Do you want us to go and gather them up? Let's go get all the bad stuff out." And he says, "No, because when you're getting up the tares, you're going to uproot the wheat with them." So like, not only do they look like the wheat, they're sharing a root system. They're growing together from the same nutrient supply. Right. So you kind of like get this big picture of what's happening. And one of the things said that like you can't really even tell the difference between wheat and tares until they're ready to harvest. And then at the harvest, like the tare plant seed is black as opposed to a wheat seed, which would be like more tan color. So that's one of the differences there. And so the master knows the enemy has corrupted the field. The servants are ready to do it immediately. Like they're ready to go and let's take care of this. But there's wisdom here. The master leaves the tares until the harvest, because at the harvest, he knows he can separate the good and the bad. And so in the harvest, the tares will be burned up because they're useless weeds, right? Like going to be burned up, just in this analogy, and the wheat is going to be gathered into the master's barn. So like we can run with this, and we will, kind of like thinking about however, but of course, like this is the one of two that we get an explanation for, right? So as you're kind of meditating with us on what we've just read, Cody, why don't you go ahead and read for us kind of the Jesus's explanation that we have, and then we come back and make some points off of that.
Yeah, so that comes from, actually, you have to drop down a little bit in Matthew 13. I didn't realize that until today, that there's two parables that come in between the actual telling of this one and the explanation. Maybe we'll have some time to come back in later episodes to the ones in between. But down in verse 36 to 43, like Nick just said, Jesus gives the explanation. It says, "Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and said, 'Explain to us the parable of the tares of the field.' And he said to them, 'The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world. And as for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. These are the sons of the kingdom, and the tares are the sons of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. And the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. So just as the tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so it shall be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness, and will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear.'" And so each of these parts of the parable has a corresponding function in the kingdom. So however you see it working in the parable there in the field, that's also how it works in the kingdom. So Jesus is the one who is casting out, sowing the seed. It says that the field is the world. So you just imagine all of the people. Jesus is sowing seed out into the world. The good seed, or the wheat, these are the good ones in the kingdom. That was interesting to me, because if you remember from the last parable, there the good seed was the word. So there's a different application of the good seed from the last parable. So it's really important to pay attention to all the little mechanisms there. But the tares are the sons of the evil one. So Jesus has been out there. The Son of Man's been sowing the good seed, but the devil has been out there sowing the tares. And so you can never underestimate the devil's influence on situations. And then at the end, there's a separation. So finally, the tares and the wheats are separated from one another. You know, like you just mentioned, the wheat and the tares, they look alike right now, right? Even going back to what wheat and tares really look like, we know they look alike. And so there's a tension there of, oh no, like what are we going to do about this? How are we going to protect the wheat from the tares? But eventually, that tension is going to be resolved, because Jesus is going to say, hey, now is the time for that separation. So the tares are going to go into the furnace of fire. So that's punishment. But we also see that the righteous are going to be rewarded. And there's a quote there from Daniel chapter 12. So the righteous are going to get rewarded. And so all in all, the parable, it's got some ups and downs as you're reading through it. It's funny. It always seems like there's something really, really wrong as you're reading through this parable, and maybe even a lot of parables. But all it takes is a little perspective shift, and you realize, oh no, God had it the whole way, right? He knew exactly what was going on. So here you do actually have that good ending, where the righteous, at some point, they are going to be removed from the tares that have been causing them all these problems, and they do get the reward for being the way that they're supposed to. So what's an application that Jesus wants us to make from this parable?
Man, I think the main thing here is, like you just said, like God is reminding us that in his kingdom, he has control. Jesus is saying, like, I've got this. And even like I'm going to step to the next point, but it hit me again. Like even the angels were ready to come in immediately. And in this parable, Jesus is explaining like, no, if you did that immediately, you're going to uproot the good stuff. So there's the wisdom of God, the wisdom of the king saying like, we got to let them grow together, which is fascinating because man's wisdom doesn't work that way. And even I think a lot of times man's wisdom would be like the servants here, like the angels, like, let's get the bad out right now, right away, be done with it. And he says, no, it needs to grow. It needs to produce fruit. And I think the producing fruit is a fascinating aspect of this kind of on the side. But the point that I see, like one of the main points, is, like if we're just saying like each parable has kind of a takeaway, one of the takeaways for me is like looking at this parable and understanding that the kingdom of heaven will exist simultaneously with evil. That when we think about like there's going to be a king reigning in heaven, and yet there's also still going to be sons of the evil one roaming around in his kingdom. Like in this the kingdom of heaven, like when we go back to the beginning of this parable, the kingdom of heaven is compared to a man who sowed good seed into a field. So we're thinking like the seed grows into the people, the citizens of the kingdom. The field is the kingdom itself. And then now you have like evil ones. And it just hit me like evil still exists in the world today. And that's a big question for a lot of people is if God is real, if Jesus is reigning in his kingdom, then why do bad things still happen to good people? Why is evil present in the world? Why doesn't God just like eradicate it? And I find it kind of interesting, like really in the very beginning of Jesus's teachings, he's teaching in a way that says, here is my intention and my purpose. And at the end of the parable, it is, there will be a judgment and the evil will be destroyed and the good will be in God's dwell. Like it doesn't really come back to that in the explanation, but I love the way it's worded in Jesus's parable. He says he's going to gather up the wheat into my barn. It's like there is a place prepared for us. Jesus goes on to say in another way in John 14, there's a place prepared for us. So it actually seems from this parable that Jesus is telling us that the kingdom will grow and expand in spite of the evil and will produce fruit, right? Like these wheat plants are still producing the wheat seeds. That's a real value there. And I can't help but think like we're going to come back to 2 Peter, but a lot of what Peter writes about is about our faith being refined by fire and becoming more pure in the face of persecution and challenges and testing and trials. Blessed is the one, Jesus said, who is persecuted for my name's sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, right? Like there are themes, and we could follow other verses that talk about like the testing and the trials and the tribulations for faithful Christians, people who are part of this kingdom. It's actually there's a purpose for that. And it's for our growth and it's for our spiritual growth and our maturity. So instead of saying like, why is there evil? Understanding like the purpose of this evil is kind of making us stronger, growing us closer to Christ. For those who are his, we understand how much we need him, looking forward to the harvest. Another thought really quick from this parable is that I think we need to realize that we're not responsible for removing evil from the world. I think that's a really big reminder that like, because I think just in our mindset, again, the angels, even the servants, like, let's go get it out right now. I think we think that way too. And we think then somehow we're responsible for eradicating evil off the face of the planet. And in this parable, in the very infancy stages of the kingdom, Jesus is saying, no, I'll do that. I'll do that in my time. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I think again, so we don't have to focus on eradicating evil. We can focus on the growth of ourselves and the others around us so that we can be ready for the harvest and we can let the master do the separating. So there's a couple of takeaways. Cody, what did you see or what do you want to point out from the parable?
Yeah, it kind of goes to that last thing that you said where, we got to let the master do the separating. It's like a sports team. Everybody's got to play their role. Everybody's got to do their part. And when you have somebody trying to fill a role that's not really their job, things just get weird. And so if we are trying to be in the business of doing the separating, in the business of eradicating evil, I like the way that you put that, removing evil from the world, man, we're not going to feel fulfilled in our job because we're kind of trying to step outside of it. Another thing I noticed was just, I think this is a good parable to look at when Christians around us aren't doing what's right. People, at least people who profess to be Christians, people who, maybe even people that we look up to, maybe even people in our churches. I feel like it's the best kept secret that Christians do bad things too. And there's a little sarcasm there because I feel like everybody knows that. We've all experienced that. We've seen it, and it can get really discouraging when we see so much negativity from people that we know they know better. My discouragement usually comes from social media or political debates within churches where you just see brother going after brother, sister going after sister, and it just like, you're just like, this is not right. This is not the way that's supposed to be. You're not supposed to act that way, and it really can bring you down. But from this parable, I gather that we should really expect that there will be people who look like and profess to be Christians who are not going to do what they're supposed to do, and in some cases, they're really there to cause problems. I mean, Jesus knew it would be this way. That's why he tells this parable here. That's why he's warning them. He also talks about it back in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 15 in the Sermon on the Mount. He tells them to beware of wolves in sheep's clothing. So people who look like they're doing the right thing, but in all actuality, they're not there for your good. He knew that would be a part of how all this goes. But he allows it to be that way, right? He allows the good to exist around the evil, sometimes in really, really close like proximity to the evil. But the reason he allows the bad to stick around so long is because the wheat needs time to grow. Like, I need time to fully develop, to get to the point where I'm bearing fruit and bearing more and more and more fruit, right? And so Jesus values the good that righteous people can bring so much that he will allow them to be around evil for a time, because he knows just he can see the development that they're going through. Paul also continues that theme of wolves among the flock in the book of Acts. So it's like, this is a thing. There are going to be bad people around good people, maybe even Christians, maybe bad people who are not doing what they're supposed to do around Christians. But we should just kind of understand that and enter into it with that understanding. Now, we can't ignore people that are hurting our productivity or harming the people around us, because that's what tares and weeds do. They sap resources, they cause problems for people. So the church, it will never be devoid of people causing problems. It's just, that's the way that it is until he calls for the harvest. And I think that's where we have to lock our focus in. It's like, okay, I know things don't look right now. I know brother so-and-so is not treating me the way that he needs to. I know that this person over here is not doing this other thing, but we're waiting for the harvest. Right? We're waiting for the time where Christ is going to come back, and then it's going to be evident, right? At that point, the righteous will be identified and will be preserved. They will be brought into the barn. And so all of the things that you had to deal with while you were down here on earth, honestly, they're not even going to matter to you anymore, because now you're with God. Now you're in heaven. Now you're where you've been striving to get to all along. These are just bumps along the road. And so, Nick, can you help us reflect on this parable today?
I think there's a couple of good things here. Like, one, just kind of hitting on at the point you just made. I think sometimes we want like to be glorified right now. Like, look at how I'm working really hard to serve Jesus. Look at, and maybe we like, no, I'm not trying to puff myself up, but it's like, God, can you just recognize the good that I'm doing? Can you just recognize, like, I just really endured this really hard thing? And I think one of the takeaways is, for us, he's going to recognize us all in the end. And we get carried to be with him. We get put in the ball. Like, that's such a beautiful, beautiful picture of kind of the judgment. It's like the terrible part is the judgment for those who are against him. They'll be burned up. And he even talks about the weeping and the gnashing of teeth in the explanation. But the good for those who are good is a beautiful picture. And so I think that's something for us to reflect on. And then I think just like kind of going in line with that thinking is that God will bring judgment in his time. Even in Peter's time, people were already saying, like, where's the promise of his coming? Hey, Ever since the fathers fell asleep, everything's just the way it was from the creation. Nothing's changed. Everything is the same. Like we look out and it's like, why isn't God stopping some of the bad stuff that's happened? And why are we still in the world that we're in? Why hasn't the Lord returned? Asking all these questions. People were already asking those questions in the first century, and Christians were falling susceptible to like, well, yeah, it's a good point. Why hasn't Jesus returned? Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, he says, do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like 1 day. The Lord is not slow about his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient towards you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works shall be burned up. Since all these things are be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking forward and hastening the coming of the day of the Lord, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat. So again, like all of this in his time, and the judgment will come in his time. And we can find comfort in knowing that he is not slow about his promise, but he is faithful toward us. He is patient towards you. The fact that the world is still existing, the fact that the Lord hasn't returned, is because he's giving people time to repent. That's a beautiful picture. He's giving us an opportunity to be a part of his kingdom, to be prepared for the judgment. So some questions to think about today. One, find comfort in knowing that the kingdom of heaven will prevail against evil. I think like every day we need to re-ingrain in ourselves that Jesus will be victorious, and he has been ultimately victorious in the resurrection. And so we have hope, and we need to think about that and dwell on that. How can I grow stronger in God's kingdom in spite of evil, or maybe even because of the evil around me? Like, how am I letting these persecutions spark growth? How am I being refined and purified in my faith? We need to trust God to judge righteously in his perfect time. Like, let's let God handle his stuff. And I think that's something that I need to be reminded of. We need to reflect on that. And then kind of just, it's a parable, right? Jesus is teaching. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. What can I learn from Jesus?
Thank you for listening to the Honest Reflection Podcast. If you liked this episode, give it a like, a share, or even a comment to let us know how we're doing. We hope we've helped you think, reflect, and be honest about your relationship with God, and we can't wait to see you again next week.